Then he tells us this long story about how one time they were at one of their many retreats. They're in Scotland somewhere. He talks about getting to this one lodge, and it's a lot of times there would be people, like famous people there, but this time it was just them. And he talks about how his grandpa was out grilling the steaks, and Granny, who's the queen, was in the kitchen making salad dressing, which I just think is so lovely. Like, I just love the idea of her mixing up a big bowl of salad dressing. That just seems so normal. Anyway, so she's over there mixing the salad dressing. Grandpa's out back cooking the steaks. It's just warm and cozy. It's just lovely. It's just them. And then who should come to dinner but his Gran Gran? Gran Gran is his great grandmother. He talks about how he had always had so much respect for her. And on this particular night, she and he just seemed like they were really getting along together. And he was making her laugh, and they were having a lot of fun together. And he just wishes that he had made more of that conversation that night, because she was 101 at the time. And he just, out of his own immaturity, he admits, just didn't ask her all the things that would have been prudent to ask, and didn't gain any wisdom. But he did enjoy her company. But he enjoyed her company because she was enjoying his. And he said he doesn't really know what it was that night, but she was paying a lot of attention to him. He'd had a big growth spurt, so maybe she looked at him now more as a man. And he talks about how as soon as she came in, she said she wanted a martini. And so somebody handed her one. And then he decided to help himself to one just to see what everyone was going to think, you know. And nobody could care less what he was doing. I mean, granted, he's like 15 years old. He's among family. Okay, have a martini. Like, this is not like some unorthodox move. Because Tiggy, by the way, that nanny, she apparently never was without her flask, and she was always letting him suck on it while she sucked on it. It's like, you know, it's kind of like, no one's going to be shocked if you drink a little at your age with your family. I'm not advocating that people are out, you know, slurping and slumming in the streets underage, but his big move to shock his family, why would that shock them? The 101-year-old, the first thing she asked for was a martini. So apparently drinking is not taboo in this family, no matter the age. So he's disappointed that nobody was more shocked, but Gran Gran was a little bit more, like, she liked that he was grasping on to his burgeoning manhood and having a drink with her. And so he makes a big, he paints this evening in the same sort of colors that he painted his time in Africa, that it was warm and inviting, and he finally felt like he was in, that he wasn't on the outskirts of things, but here he was in the middle, playing a part in the whole drama of the family scene. He wasn't watching it happening, he was in, and grandmother was laughing, and Pa was looking at him, appreciating that Harry was able to make the great-grandmother so amused, and it was just this wonderful moment. And he says, though, that basically this was the one and only time that it was ever that good. How is that the only time it was good? And, you know, something that I thought too as I was reading, he says, "This was my family, in which I, for one night at least, had a distinctive role, and that role for once wasn't the naughty one." And it's like, well, you had a distinctive role because you were actually trying. You engaged your grandmother, you spoke with her, you had a drink with her. Like, if you're gonna sit on the sidelines with your arms crossed and be like, why isn't anyone including me? You won't be included. Include yourself. Like, have a little bit of initiative here. A little self-governance wouldn't hurt him. You know, and he's like, finally somebody wasn't seeing me as the naughty one. Because you weren't acting like the naughty one. I mean, okay, you're having a drink underage, but you're with your family, nobody said no. You weren't the naughty one because you were giving of yourself for once. You were thinking, how can I be of assistance to somebody else? His grandmother walked in, he gets up quickly, he offers her his arm, he takes her to her seat, like he's being a gentleman. Wow, look at the way the world works when you act decently, and you are acting like the naughty one. As we've said in many videos before, he doesn't understand why everybody thinks that he's this way. Why does everybody think that I'm so naughty? Well, we think that because you're acting that way. And when you act differently, we think other things about you. What a revelation. Oh, and then this is the last thing I'll say, because that's the end of our section. By the way, if you're trying to keep track of where we are, we have just read, because you know how this book is delineated into these like little tiny chapters that are half a page long. We have gotten all the way to 30. So next time we come together, which will be on Tuesday, we'll be starting on 30. So if you are listening to this or you're reading it, I mean, God forbid you do that. I'm doing it for you. Anyway, we are on chapter 30. That's where we're going to end. But one other thing I want to say, he makes this big point about Gran Gran, and he says that she was the war queen and that she had been in London at the time of the bombings, that she had entertained Churchill, that she had lived through the brutality of the Blitz. And he had always admired her strength, and that she had come out swinging, saying, I'm not leaving England, and there's nothing anyone can do to make me leave. This is my home, and I love it. And he talks about how he had always found that so inspiring, and that, you know, he'd always felt the same way about England. And he says, she was famous for saying that no matter how bad things got, she'd never ever leave England, and people loved her for it. I loved her for it. I loved my country, and the idea of declaring you'd never leave struck me as wonderful. Well, it didn't take much to turn his heart against that concept. How can you sit there with your grandmother, this matriarch that she is, your great-grandmother, who sat in Buckingham Palace as it's being bombed multiple times, brutality littering the streets, homes in a shamble, people dying from the blasts, people running to hide out in bomb shelters, night after night after night, and she wouldn't leave. Yet, you get a little bad press about your broken finger, and your world is shattered. You aren't made out of the same things as Gran Gran. That's all I can say. You are not made out of the same cloth. I don't know what cloth they cut you out of, but it would seem, I mean, he's almost like a transplant in his own family. I mean, on the one hand, he's always like, I always felt on the outs with my family. And you wonder how much of that was a self-fulfilled prophecy. But then at the same time, it's just like, these people who were magnificent raised you. What was it that you didn't get from them that would have helped you to realize that those attributes and those virtues which you so admired could have been attained also by you? Like, but what puzzle piece was not put in place so that you could attain all those virtues? Was he just spoiled rotten? Was he just left to disintegrate in his misery over his mother? Like, what happened to this person? You've got the war queen. You've got Queen Elizabeth herself as your grandmother. You've got strong men in your life. Like, what was it that you just could not comprehend? And I ultimately think that what it came down to was that no one ever took him aside and said, this title of spare can either get in your head or you can rise above it. You are not this. Let's talk about all the things you're going to accomplish, because you don't have to be the king. It's like you've been given the ticket to ride. Like this, you got the way better slot. You are just as famous, just as well liked, but you have none of the responsibilities. He has everything William has except for the actual crown. He's going to walk a few steps behind William and Kate. There's a hierarchy, he says. Yeah, okay, there's a hierarchy. But how are you going to just absolutely kill it in your role? How are you going to make everybody super impressed with who you are as a person? Instead of always waiting around for people to tell you what you should think about yourself, you tell people how they should think about you. But he never takes on that thrilling responsibility of being the one to determine what people think of him. He just continually wears the mantle that everyone hands him and then cries about it. I don't know. I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day and she said it gets better when he goes to Afghanistan and it's less whiny. We can only hope.